"You don't deserve the success," my parents said during my graduation dinner. "Then let Jessica pay your bills," I replied while lifting my glass. I walked out, and that was the last time I ever looked back. I said it with a quiet grin, steady and sure. The kind of expression you give when someone finally proves they were never truly for you. After I lifted my glass, a stillness settled over the space. Maybe it lasted 5 seconds, maybe more, but it felt like everything froze just long enough for me to watch their reactions change in real time. The laughs cut off. The soft clinking of utensils stopped. My father, still gripping a beer bottle that was half gone, blinked slowly like he wasn't sure what he just heard. My mother's smile faltered, her eyes darting between us with that same look of disappointment I'd grown accustomed to seeing. But I was certain of what I had said. For once in my life, I spoke without hesitation, and I meant every word of it. The event was meant to honor something important, my college graduation, and not just any school. I had made it through Oak Haven, one of the best public universities in the state. I had pushed through it almost completely alone. My tuition covered mostly through scholarships, part-time work, tutoring sessions that stretched past midnight, and early morning shifts at the cafe on campus. It was tough, but I made it. And not a single person in my family had helped. Still, I invited them all. I spent nearly all of what I had left to book a restaurant patio, fill it with food, hang some decorations, buy drinks, and even hire a musician, just a guy with a guitar and a voice that carried real feeling. I wanted the night to feel like something big, like a new chapter was starting, and maybe it was, just not in the way I thought. Everyone came. My mom, quiet, but there like always, wearing that forced smile that never quite reached her eyes. My dad, showing up an hour late, already tipsy, wearing a crumpled fishing shirt and that familiar smug look. My aunt and uncle, hovering between supporters and spectators like usual. My little cousins running around with balloon strings wrapped around their wrists. Jessica didn't come. She rarely did. But somehow, she still took up space. She was there in every story my parents told, especially the one that flipped the entire evening on its head. "You don't deserve this success," my father said, standing like he was about to make a toast. Jessica did. He didn't slur the words. He wasn't laughing. He meant it. And my mother, she just nodded along, her silent agreement somehow cutting deeper than his words. Those words slammed into me like bricks, carrying the weight of every year before that night. Right then, I understood something I should have known long ago. I had spent my entire life waiting for my parents to say they were proud of me. They never would. So I lifted my drink, acted like it was still a celebration, and said, "Great. Then she can start covering your bills too." I didn't need to yell. Everyone heard. Everyone understood. A few even gave small smiles, not because it was funny, but because they recognized the truth in it. I set my glass down, looked at my parents one last time, and walked out. No explanations. No hugs. No looking back. I didn't go home afterward. I couldn't sit in my empty apartment playing that scene over and over. So I just drove. No idea where I was heading. Just streets and silence under streetlights. By midnight, I found myself parked at the edge of town up at Lookout Point, the spot where teens used to sneak away to feel like the world was small and they could breathe. I turned off the car and left the windows open. The cold didn't bother me. It kept me grounded, and all I could hear in my mind was that sentence. "You don't deserve this success." Jessica did. Success? The degree I earned after 5 grueling years? The job I landed after dozens of rejections and brutal interviews? The debt I avoided by skipping every night out and living off discount noodles? What had Jessica done that made her more worthy of that success? That question had haunted me for as long as I could remember. Back then, Jessica was always the one forgiven first, the one who got endless chances, the one who was praised just for showing up. She quit community college after 1 semester, and somehow, my parents still called her the smart one. I got my first job at 16 to afford my own clothes for school. Jessica, she was nearly fired from GameStop 3 times and still got told how proud they were of her for working hard. I had never had actual proof of the difference in how we were treated, not until my 3rd year of college. I went back home one weekend and noticed a paper sitting on the kitchen counter. It was a tuition statement. Jessica's name was on it, marked as fully paid. That was the first moment I had confirmation, not just a gut feeling, that the situation was just as unfair as I had always suspected. I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to turn it into a conflict. I told myself maybe they couldn't support me because money was tight. Maybe they were doing their best. Maybe they assumed I didn't need any help. But hours before standing on that restaurant patio, hearing my father brag about the daughter who didn't even bother to come while my mother chimed in with anecdotes about Jessica's artistic spirit and free soul, completely brushing aside everything I had worked for, that crushed every one of those maybes. That's when I started unraveling the past. I pulled up old documents, replayed memories I had pushed down, and began noticing the pattern, who they stepped in to protect, and who they consistently left to figure things out alone. It had never really been about financial limits. It had never been about who achieved more. It was about belief. And the painful truth was my parents never believed in me. As I stood there, staring out over the quiet city, I quietly whispered to myself, "It ends now." I wasn't talking about that night's argument. I meant the fake smile, the internal begging, the endless effort to prove my worth. I was done reaching toward people who never once reached back. The thing about growing up invisible is that you become really good at slipping out of view without causing a scene, even while carrying everyone else's weight. But something shifted inside me that night on the hill. For the first time, I didn't want to fade into the background. I didn't just want to leave the celebration. I didn't just want to break from my parents' voices. I wanted space from the entire situation, from all of them, from the people I had spent years calling my family. For the longest time, I believed that if I worked hard enough, kept my grades up, landed the right job, eventually, they'd recognize me, that something would finally click. They'd look up and actually see me, but that moment never came. And it's not like they were evil or cartoonishly cruel. That would have made it easier to leave. No. It was subtle. I simply didn't matter unless they needed something. My dad needed help filing taxes. I was the dependable one. Mom had issues with her laptop. I was the one they called. Jessica smashed her car again. I was expected to give her rides to interviews she wouldn't show up for. It wasn't that they resented me. Resentment takes attention. They just didn't care. That realization stuck with me for several days after the gathering. I didn't answer any calls. I didn't reply to any voicemails. My aunt messaged me through Facebook saying my parents weren't acting like themselves that night and that they didn't mean what they said. Mom left me a voicemail begging me not to let one moment ruin everything, but it wasn't one moment. It was all of them. All the subtle digs, all the moments when Jessica failed and was told she was figuring things out. But when I struggled, I was told to be more mature. Like the time I tried talking to my parents about my future plans, and my mother told me I was expecting too much while my father said I was overthinking everything. Then later that night, they announced with pride that Jessica had started a band in the garage, a band that never even performed once. All the frustration I'd buried started bubbling up in pieces. Old memories that hadn't surfaced in years began coming back. Like the time I broke my arm in high school and still got blamed for missing sports practice, while Jessica flunked every class and was rewarded with a trip to Florida to get some rest. Or the day I opened my college acceptance letter and both my parents looked at me and said, "Don't count on us to pay for anything." I wasn't counting on it. I never had. Still, I gave everything I could, my time, my money, my emotional energy, my silence. But at some point, I had nothing left to offer. There was no dramatic ending. No shouting, no emotional meltdown, no final speech. I simply stopped. I stopped reaching out. I stopped replying. I stopped holding on to hope they'd change. They had always wanted me to be someone I wasn't. The quiet helper, the dependable sibling, the person clapping quietly from the sidelines while everyone else took the spotlight. And I played that part so well for so long, I almost forgot I could walk off that stage entirely. The choice didn't come with some big emotional breakthrough or dramatic background music. It showed up on an average Tuesday, nothing special about it. Just a plain, dull Tuesday. 2 days after the party, I rolled out of bed, brewed some coffee, sat at the small kitchen table in my one-bedroom apartment, and stared at the photo from my college graduation, the only picture I'd asked the waiter to snap before I left the restaurant. You can see others in the background laughing, plates still full, and a balloon frozen in motion. But I wasn't looking at the party. I was looking at myself. I didn't look proud, not even relieved. I looked drained, like someone who had carried a load for so long, he forgot it was okay to set it down. That's when I picked up my phone, not to send a message, not to make a call, to block. First my dad, then my mom, then Jessica, then the group chat that only remembered I existed when someone needed a ride or had forms they didn't know how to fill. One by one, I shut them out. No dramatic exit. No vague online post. No goodbye speech. I simply turned down the volume, then I started boxing things up. I'd stayed in that apartment out of routine. It was close enough that I could be there if they needed something, but distant enough to feel like I had boundaries, but it never truly felt like mine. It was a holding space, a place in between trying and giving up, and I was tired of waiting around. I sold off most of my things on Facebook Marketplace, put the cash toward clearing my remaining student loans, handed the lease to a coworker who needed a place. Within 2 weeks, I was gone. New apartment, new city, new phone number. No goodbyes, no explanation. The only personal thing I took aside from my basics was my diploma. I had it framed. I hung it on the wall above my desk, not to impress anyone, not for inspiration, but to remind myself I did that alone, that it counted. Even if no one acknowledged it, even if my parents stood in front of everyone and pretended it meant nothing. I was still here, still upright. And for the first time, I wasn't standing because I had no choice. I was standing because I walked away. Funny how noisy life used to feel when they were still in it. Not just their words, but their opinions, their judgment, their constant backhanded remarks, even the thoughts, should I text them? Maybe if I explain it differently this time, they'll get it. Once all of that disappeared and was replaced with true silence, I thought I'd feel isolated, but I didn't. I felt light. That first night in my new apartment, I sat on the floor. No couch yet, no bed frame. Just a mattress, a box of food, and quiet. Not the kind of quiet that makes you anxious. The kind that feels calm, like air slowly returning to your lungs. I didn't open my phone, didn't scroll, didn't wonder who noticed because I already knew what I'd see. Missed calls, texts dripping with guilt, but wrapped in fake concern. Probably a few after all we've done for you messages too meant to guilt me back in, but I had blocked all of it, not to hurt them, but because I didn't know any more explanations to people who had already made up their minds about who I was. And in that stillness, I began to remember who I used to be. I remembered how much I loved cooking before every family meal turned into a moment to be judged. So on the second night, I made myself something real. Nothing big, just some roasted vegetables, garlic bread, and pasta. But I ate it at a table I had put together with my own hands. I remembered I used to sketch. While unpacking, I found old notebooks labeled miscellaneous. Inside were sketchbooks I hadn't touched in years. I spent a few evenings drawing again. No fear of being watched. No need to impress anyone. No pressure. I remembered I liked being alone, that I didn't have to prove I mattered to anyone in order to actually matter. And little by little, new faces started showing up in my life. There was a guy named Thomas who lived nearby. He started including me in his game nights with his circle. Then there was Laura, someone I bumped into at a bookstore. She asked what I was flipping through, and somehow, it turned into a conversation over coffee. My coworkers started treating me like more than just the person who always had things together. They were genuinely interested in hearing what my life had been like, not reshaping it. None of them had any idea about the years I spent chasing affection as if it were something to win. They just liked being around me. That was unfamiliar, and I wasn't planning on walking them through the long road behind me just to validate my progress. I didn't have anything left to justify. All I had now was stillness and finally a life that felt like it belonged to me. It was about 3 months after that dinner. I had just gotten in from work, jacket half on, bags over my shoulder, when a knock came at the door. 3 quick sharp hits.